Forgive me, you are clearly in New York and not in Washington, and I do want to lean into your deep experience in this city as being with the NYPD and really leading the terrorism outfit here. I mean, what are your impressions at this point, given the fact that these were National Guard that were supposed to be deployed to make the city safer, and now they themselves, it appears, have been targeted?
Well, the National Guard has become of late a little bit of a lightning rod because of how this administration has deployed them and what controversies they have found themselves in the middle of, whether it is the role that they have played in multiple cities in assisting groups like ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, and Border Patrol. They have become a bit of a lightning rod in the roundup and deportation efforts that are going on for people who are here illegally. But at the same time, just their presence in Washington makes them a potential target because there they are in uniform. And I think it was on November 7th, we saw another call from ISIS, which is reemerging through its propaganda arms, to call on lone wolf attacks in both the United States and Europe, and to attack symbols of the government and law enforcement. So right now, we don't know what the motive was, and we probably won't know what the motive was or is in this case until they get that gunman identified and figure out what has he been doing, who has he been communicating with, did he leave a message behind or forward about the motive for this. Right now, that's a blank spot. They're going through the possibilities, but he, when he's identified, is going to be the key to those answers.
Kristen Holmes, to you now in Florida. You are traveling with the president. He is in Mar-a-Lago for Thanksgiving. He obviously has taken action here and has already made his thoughts pretty clear, given this absolutely chilling event. As I said, inside of 2 blocks from the White House.
Yeah, and they are monitoring this very closely. And I do want to note, I'm not sure if you announced this yet, but we have now heard from the Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, who says that President Trump has ordered 500 new troops to be sent to D.C. in the aftermath of this shooting for what he says is to keep the city beautiful and safe. I had actually spoken to a number of members of the D.C. government and D.C. responders who believe that this was likely to be where this story went, that President Trump was going to ramp up the presence in Washington, D.C. Now, we won't see President Trump again today. They call what they call a lid, which means the president won't be seen in public. He's not going to be making any remarks, but that doesn't mean that he's not going to be posting on Truth Social. And as we've already seen, he has been kind of breaking some of the news of what he is hearing to the public. In his Truth Social post, he was the one who noted for the first time that there were 2 guardsmen down who had been critically injured. That critically injured part was not something we had heard before. Obviously, as we've been reporting, there's some confusion as to what exactly happened with those 2 guardsmen. The West Virginia governor first saying that they had both died, then coming back and saying that he was getting conflicting reports. So we're still waiting on that part of this. Then President Trump essentially vowing retribution against the suspect, saying that he was severely injured. That's how the public learned about the suspect's well-being. And then noting that he was going to essentially, quote unquote, pay the price for what happened on the streets of D.C. earlier today. One of the things I am told the White House is watching incredibly closely is the motive, the why for all of this. And right now, they still seem to have no answers.
Out of Washington, D.C., 2 National Guardsmen were shot a short time ago near the White House. Law enforcement sources say the Guardsmen engaged in gunfire with a suspect before being shot. Police say the scene is now secure and a suspect is in custody. National Guard troops from multiple states have been in the U.S. Capitol as part of the president's crackdown on crime in that city. Daniel Brunner is a retired FBI special agent, and he joins us now. And I kind of want to get your opinion on this as we hear from the president that he's deploying 500 more troops to the city. In your estimation, is this a good idea at this hour?
Well, I think at this point, we're seeing that, National Guardsmen were deployed in downtown D.C., where not necessarily all of the crime is being seen. Anacostia, the outskirts, where there's more crime incidents. If you're going to deploy guardsmen, I think it would be there. But clearly, your guardsmen are standing out on post, standing at the street corner. That was in my opinion, this was a targeted attack based on the witnesses reporting saying that all of a sudden they heard gunshots. There was no chaos, no struggling, and the fact that you've seen photos from on scene, whereas the glass was shattered at the bus stop. My opinion is, based on my instincts as an FBI agent for 20 years, this individual targeted, found these two guardsmen who were standing their post, and they just walked right up. This is a very difficult environment for them. They're not built for law enforcement. They are National Guardsmen. They're trained in combat, military operations. They're not trained in street crime, street incidents, and how to recognize a potential threat that's upcoming to them. So I feel that the president is putting them in a very difficult position, targeting them and making them somewhat of a scene of a target for an incident, much like what we see here today.
And this has been disputed in the courts as well. In fact, the very presence of National Guard is still, at this moment, before the courts. In terms of them becoming a political target, I mean, as you said, you as a former FBI agent, are you creating... in fact, let's pause to listen to the FBI Director, Kash Patel.
To include the Department of Homeland Security, Secret Service, ATF, DEA, and we're thankful for the mayor's assistance in this matter, the Metropolitan Police Department and their skills in investigating homicides and gun shootings in this city is exceptional. We will work together collaboratively because this is a matter of national security, because this is a matter of pride. President Trump has been informed. We've been in contact with the White House. We will shortchange the American public with no resources to make sure we find and safeguard our nation's capital right here in Washington, D.C., and bring anyone responsible for this heinous act of violence to justice. I would lastly like to add to the American public and the world, please send your prayers to those brave warriors who are in critical condition and their families. They are here serving our country. They are here protecting everyday Americans and citizens around the world in our nation's capital. They are the heroes of this day, and we must remember them on this day and every day, and their families and the sacrifice they have made. I will now turn it over to Chief Carroll of the Metropolitan Police Department. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jeff Carroll. I'm the Executive Assistant Chief here at the Metropolitan Police Department. At approximately 2:15 this afternoon, members of the D.C. National Guard were on high visibility patrols in the area of 17th and I Street Northwest when a suspect came around the corner, raised his arm with a firearm, and discharged it at the National Guard members. The National Guard members, there were other members that were in the area. They were able to, after some back and forth, able to subdue the individual and bring them into custody. Within moments, members of law enforcement in the area were also able to assist and bring that individual into custody. At this time, as the director mentioned, the National Guard members are being treated at a local hospital. DC Fire and EMS responded to the scene to provide first aid for those individuals and transport them to a local hospital. The suspect in this case was also transported for treatment at a local hospital. Madam Mayor.
I'm Muriel Bowser. I'm the mayor of Washington, D.C., and I, too, want to send my thoughts and prayers to the families of the guardsmen and to the guardsmen who are in critical condition in a local hospital. I am joined by members and leadership from the D.C. National Guard, from the West Virginia National Guard, United States Secret Service, Deputy Mayor Pia, Fire Chief Donnelly, and Metro's General Manager Randy Clark. And we join with the FBI Director in ensuring that MPD investigates, the U.S. Attorney prosecutes this case to the fullest extent of the law. I've had the opportunity to brief U.S. Attorney General Pam Bondi, who was speaking to the president when I called, as well as the United States Attorney Pirro, who assured me that this case will have her office's complete attention.
Mayor, was there any other suspect?
Chief.
Sure. So no, at this time, there's no indication that there was any other suspect. The one suspect that was involved in this incident, they were shot during the interaction, and they were transported to the hospital for treatment.
Mayor, does this validate the need for the National Guard here in D.C.?
What we know, Andrea, is that this is a targeted shooting. One individual who appeared to target these guardsmen. That individual has been taken into custody.
Can you tell us about any more details on the condition of the two National Guardsmen and whether or not anyone else was injured? And a quick question follow-up for the FBI director. You said that we'll make sure we find the perpetrators for this act. So just to clarify, the person believed to be responsible is in custody and there are no other suspects?
Sure, so I can start out. Again, Chief Carroll from MPD. So both of the individuals, the guard members, they are in critical condition in a local hospital at this time being treated. At this point, we have no other suspects. We have reviewed video from the area. It appears, like I said, to be a lone gunman that raised a firearm and ambushed these members of the National Guard, and he was quickly taken into custody by other National Guard members and law enforcement members.
Have you got any sense of motive?
No, at this time, obviously, we're very in the preliminary stages of investigation. There's a lot of things, a lot of agents that are here from various federal agencies, law enforcement agencies. We have the full power of the FBI and our federal partners here in the task force. So we're looking at all those different aspects, but we don't have any motive.
Guardsmen armed, sir?
The National Guardsmen that were shot, I'm told they were armed.
Did they get off shots?
At this time, that's part of the preliminary investigation.
Can you explain how the suspect was apprehended?
Sure. So how the suspect was apprehended, as I said, the individual, the suspect came around the corner. He immediately started firing a firearm at the two National Guard members. So at that time, there were other National Guard members that were in the area. They heard the gunfire. They actually were able to intervene and to kind of hold down the suspect after he had been shot on the ground until law enforcement got there within moments.
And he was shot by a National Guardsman?
At this point, we're still investigating exactly who shot the individual. It's not clear at this time.
Chief, do you know what kind of weapon was used?
We don't know what kind of weapon. There was DC police. It happened right in front of the Metro, although there is no indication that the perpetrator was on the Metro. So there's Metro Transit Police in the area, and obviously being on 17th Street by the White House, Uniformed Division Secret Service were in the immediate area as well.
What kind of weapon the alleged perpetrator used?
We do not know at this time. It's still in investigation.
We're going to be able to take a couple more.
Has been able to question the suspect, or is his condition so severe that you haven't been able to have a conversation?
Sure. Again, so as I said, we're very preliminary in the investigation, so we're looking into all aspects of who the individual is, his connections. At this time, he's still in the hospital receiving treatment.
And I would just like, hang on, I would just like to add, the reason that this suspect is in custody is because of the bravery of the men and women of the National Guard who responded due to their extensive training to secure American lives today. There was not any further injury and any further shootings. We should highlight the fact that the men and women of law enforcement, the interagency, the Department of War, and the National Guard executed their training with great precision today and prevented an even greater tragedy from befalling us. These National Guardsmen are heroes, and we must pray for their safety and their speedy recovery. And as the chief said, we are in the preliminary stages of this investigation. We will run down every single lead, every piece of evidence. This is the power of the U.S. government at its best at the state, local, and federal level. That is why this interagency group is standing behind us to assure America and the world that we will continue to keep D.C. safe. And thankfully, we have Metropolitan Police Department, the National Guardsmen, and federal agents, and the Department of Justice and Attorney General willing to prosecute the mission to keep Americans safe. And President Trump has rightly stated that this heinous act will be investigated, and he has thanked the National Guards men and women and the men and women of law enforcement.
Thank you.
Families get notified?
Did the suspect say anything at the time? Why did the West Virginia governor say that they Chief, was anyone else shot?
All right, that was FBI Director Kash Patel, Washington, D.C. Mayor Muriel Bowser, and other officials giving an update on the shooting that occurred today near the White House. Kash Patel and the mayor saying the two National Guardsmen that were shot are in critical condition and in the hospital. Police confirming a single suspect is in custody and also in the hospital. And at this time, there is no indication that any other suspect was involved in this shooting. I want to bring back our Chief Law Enforcement and Intelligence Analyst, John Miller. So, John, you were listening to that press conference. What stood out to you?
Well, some of the gaps that we've been talking about have been filled, which is this did not stem from some other crime or incident unfolding on the street. From Kash Patel, the FBI director, we got a description of the gunman walking around the corner, walking straight in the direction of the two National Guardsmen, raising his arm with a handgun and opening fire in what was a deliberate attack, targeted attack against these National Guard officers. Executive Assistant Police Chief of Washington, D.C. Metro Police, Jeff Carroll, told us that he raised his arm with the handgun, opened fire. one of those guardsmen was shot in the head at least. There was what Caro described as some back and forth. Presumably that may be an exchange of gunfire, but that the suspect was wounded by a gunshot and was taken to the hospital. He's still unidentified. We learned that there is no other suspect being sought, and we also know that they still have not identified him, which is going to be really the first step on getting towards motive. Why would the National Guard be the target of a lone gunman in an unprovoked attack in the streets of Washington, D.C.? You know, as Kristen talked about a little while ago, the National Guard has become a lightning rod across the country because of the engagements that they have been put into by this administration, which are fairly unusual for the National Guard's mission. Law enforcement missions in the streets of cities, helping ICE with migrant raids and to chase people who are here illegally and bring them into custody. The Washington, D.C. presence as a crime-fighting entity. But we also know, separate from that, that terrorist groups like ISIS, both on November 7th and November 20th, came out with new calls, both in the U.S. and Europe, asking their followers to conduct lone wolf attacks against government targets in the United States. So there are a number of things this could emerge from, could be connected to, could explain a motive, but until law enforcement identifies who that gunman is and gets deeper into his communications, his associations, his travel, his background, right now it's all just speculation. And motive is going to end up being very important here.
Yeah, and Charles Ramsey, the former D.C. police chief, is also with us. To that point, to what John was just saying about not revealing the identity of the suspect, were you surprised by that? And why don't you think that they revealed the suspect's name?
No, I'm not surprised at all. In fact, you know, I would be surprised if they had released any real information about the suspect at this point in time. There's a lot of background work that has to be done. I mean, the social media footprint, they're probably executing search warrants at a residence, maybe a vehicle, trying to get their hands on associates, friends, and so forth, that to interview them about the suspect and so forth. Once that name is out there, they lose control of all that. And so you don't want to put the name out until you've done all you can do, or at least as much as you need to do, in order to do the background properly on the suspect. I mean, there is going to be a trial. This guy's still alive. So there's going to be a trial. So, you know, the collection of evidence is going to be very, very important.
Yeah, and Catherine Schweid, and in our final 30 seconds here, what was your takeaway from that news conference about what they revealed and what they did not reveal about this investigation?
It was a quick news conference with only so many questions because they knew they had to be out in front of the press and give some answers if they had them, but there's just a lot of information they just don't know yet.
Yeah, there's a lot of. We do know that there is a lone gunman. They said one suspect who is now in custody. That's what the police just said in this news conference. And there's a lot more to learn, including the motive and who the suspect is. Stay with CNN. There is a lot more in this breaking news. Thanks for joining us this hour on CNN. I'm Manu Raju. The Lead starts right now.
This is CNN Breaking News.
Welcome to The Lead. I'm Erica Hill in for Jake Tapper, and we do begin this hour as we continue our coverage of the major breaking news out of Washington, D.C., where 2 National Guard members were shot this afternoon. It happened in a busy section of downtown D.C. This is actually just blocks from the White House. President Trump, of course, is not at the White House. He is in Florida for the holiday. FBI Director Kash Patel says both victims are in critical condition. Earlier this afternoon, West Virginia's governor said the 2 Guard members are from his state. The governor also retracted an earlier announcement that the Guard members had died. We also just heard from the mayor of Washington, D.C. At a quick press conference we just heard as she offered more detail about the attack.
What we know, Andrea, is that this is a targeted shooting. One individual who appeared to target these guardsmen, that individual has been taken into custody.
3 law enforcement sources telling CNN the suspect approached the guardsmen, appearing to target them. One source says the suspect is not cooperating with investigators at this moment, and also the suspect did not have any identification on him at the time of his arrest. CNN's Brian Todd is near the scene. So, Brian, what more do we know about this shooting?
Well, Erica, just a few moments ago, we did get a little bit of detail from Jeff Carroll. He's the Executive Assistant Chief of the D.C. Metropolitan Police Department. He said this incident occurred at about 2:15 p.m. Eastern Time this afternoon at the intersection of 17th and I Streets Northwest. That is not far away from where we're standing right here. That an individual, quote, came around the corner, raised his firearm at the 2 National Guardsmen, and then discharged his firearm. Now, earlier today, the Joint Task Force DC, which oversees the National Guard, told us that this incident occurred near the Farragut West Metro Station, which is just about a block over my right shoulder that way in downtown DC. Again, according to Jeff Carroll, the Assistant Executive Chief of the DC Metro Police, the individual, quote, came around a corner, raised his firearm, and then discharged it at the 2 National Guardsmen. They were both hit. According to FBI Director Kash Patel, they are now in critical condition. You mentioned earlier that the governor of West Virginia had said earlier that the 2 had died as a result of the shooting. He later had to go back on that statement. So right now, we're told they're in critical condition. After the shooting, just in the moments after the shooting, according to Jeff Carroll, the 2 other members of the National Guard subdued the suspect. We were told by law enforcement sources that he was carried away on a stretcher from the scene. His condition is not known. I yelled a question at the chief and at Kash Patel as they left, saying, is there anything you can tell us about a possible motive for this shooting? They did not answer that question as they walked away. So we'll be digging on that, of course, in the hours ahead. Erica?
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of questions about that. Brian, appreciate the reporting. Thank you. We'll continue to check in with you, of course, as you learn more. Also with us is West Virginia's Attorney General, J.B. McCuskey. Mr. Attorney General, we appreciate you taking the time this afternoon. First of all, the fact that this is being called a targeted shooting, and we know there are, I believe, about 160 members of the West Virginia National Guard still in Washington, D.C. How are you sitting with that information in this moment?
I am enraged, if I'm being completely honest. And I think one of the things that should be noted here is that all 160 of those Guards members who were in D.C. today had volunteered their time over the Thanksgiving holiday to help complete this mission. And something about West Virginia that most people don't know is that we have the highest per capita military involvement of any state in the country. And we have a long history of men and women willing to stand up for our country and serve our country. And so what this perpetrator needs to understand is that he has attacked 2 of the bravest people in this country that come from the bravest state in this country. And I can assure you that the governor and I will leave no stone unturned to ensure that justice is served swiftly to the person who perpetrated this attack.
Do you have any sense of where these guardsmen may be from?
I don't have a sense of where these guardsmen are from, but we do know that, the West Virginia border is right there next to D.C. And so there would be a fairly significant likelihood that these guardsmen would have been deployed from the Eastern Panhandle and potentially not very far from their home.
As I know from, frankly, covering far too many events from our experts, the initial information can often turn out to be wrong. We saw the governor actually walking back his initial post that the 2 guardsmen had died. A sigh of relief for many people as they learned that they were, in fact, not dead. We do know that they are in critical condition. Can you just give us a sense of how this information is unfolding for you and for other folks in your state in terms of how you're able to be getting updates in what is clearly a very fluid situation?
Yes. So as the lawyer for the people of West Virginia and the lawyer for our state's government, I'm very leery of new information. So I'm trying to absorb as much as I can, process that, and ensure that all the actions that we're taking are based on real actionable intel. The governor is doing the exact same thing. I'm certain that the information that he acted upon was as good as it could have been at the time. We're blessed to have a wonderful governor here in West Virginia, and this is a real hard time, and it's a time I think that every American should be praying for our country and praying for these families.
As we just learned, the 2 guardsmen, as far as we know, are in critical condition. Do you have any more information on their state, potentially even on their injuries?
I do not have any further information that I can share with you, but what I can tell you is that there's an army of people here in West Virginia that are praying for their recovery, and we're hoping for a Thanksgiving miracle.
And have you been able to be in contact with their families at all?
I have not been able to be in contact with their families. I spend a lot of time with Guards members here in Charleston, and I've been in contact with a myriad of my Guard friends, and I've reached out to the tag here in West Virginia, and I can assure you the resolve is steely.
Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth just a short time ago said that the president is requesting an additional 500 National Guard troops be deployed to Washington, D.C. Do you believe that's the right response in this moment?
Yeah, it's not my job to judge the response from the president. He is the commander in chief. If he believes that is the best way to keep our nation's capital and our service members that are serving there safe, then we will defend his actions.
If an additional 500 were deployed, do you know what the chances would be in terms of how many could potentially be from West Virginia?
I don't know how many would be from West Virginia, but I do know that there are Guards, men and women here in West Virginia that would jump at the chance to try to secure a city where two of their own have been brazenly ambushed and attacked in broad daylight, merely blocks from the White House, in a city where every American is supposed to be able to feel safe, to come to, and to do the business of the government. And that is a crucial, incredibly crucial mission. And the folks here in West Virginia, when asked to serve, will serve, and they'll serve in the way that their commander-in-chief asked them to.
As we just learned in the press conference, the mayor said that she had briefed Attorney General Pam Bondi. She said that when she spoke with the Attorney General, she was actually on the phone with the president. And also this would be given their complete attention. We, of course, heard very strong words from the director of the FBI there. How can, if at all, how could your state help? Kash Patel, of course, noting this is, all hands on deck, that all agencies are working together.
Yeah, I think we will respond in whatever way it is that we are asked. But I think crucially and most importantly right now, what needs to happen is that every West Virginian, all 1.8 million of us, and every single American needs to be praying for these two families. And we need to really be taking a long look at where we are in a country where somebody would ambush two service members in our nation's capital in broad daylight in what appears to be a targeted attack. And these two service members' lives will not be forgotten. Hopefully they will get to be with us for a long time longer. But this attack is something that will be remembered for a very long time.
It is an important message, certainly on this eve of Thanksgiving as well. Attorney General J.B. McCuskey, thank you for your time, sir. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much for your thoughts and prayers, and to everybody out there, thank you.
I do want to bring in now CNN's chief law enforcement and intelligence analyst, John Miller, along with Donnell Harvin, former chief of Homeland Security and Intelligence for the government for the District of Columbia. So, John, I want to start with you first of all. What are you hearing from your sources about how this happened, about how this attack unfolded?
Well, events have crystallized to the point that we've got a richer picture. It was described to us in the press conference very much the way Evan Perez described the video that was captured by security cameras. The individual comes walking around the corner, walks straight up to the two National Guardsmen, raises his arm with a handgun, opens fire on them. Other National Guards people who are in the area hear that gunfire and respond to that place. There is a struggle with the gunman and possibly an exchange of gunfire prior to that, where the glass from the bus shelter is shot out. They struggle to get the gunman down on the ground and handcuffed. Secret Service uniform division personnel who patrol that area are also there almost immediately, rendering medical aid as they wait for the ambulance to the National Guard officers who are down. And what we now know is that this was a targeted shooting, as Kash Patel called it, an ambush, as the Executive Assistant Police Chief Jeff Carroll described it, a deliberate attack on uniformed members of the federal government who, although they are from the National Guard, were assigned to a law enforcement mission as part of the D.C. Safe Task Force. So now What was the motive behind that? That hinges on what's the identity of the gunman, which I am told authorities were still trying to determine for certain.
As they try to determine that, there are also questions given that, given where things stand now, where does this, the fact that this was targeted, that as John was noting, it was called an ambush, how does that change, if at all, the investigation in this moment?
Well,
the reason why they call it an ambush.
Danelle, go ahead.
The reason why they call it an ambush is because it's pretty clear that there was no dispute beforehand. There were no words exchanged. This individual walked up, brandished a firearm, and used that firearm, and essentially, shot these individuals that were patrolling our nation's capital. That helps in terms of understanding and being able to directly kind of link the motives of the individual to their actions. So what law enforcement is going to be doing right now is, there's two different ways this can go. One, these individuals, these National Guardsmen, were targets of opportunity, which means that this individual just kind of walked up and found the first targets that he saw that were wearing a uniform. The other option or possibility is that this individual had this location kind of staked out, what we call pre-operational surveillance, and was looking over the course of a day or multiple days for a target. In either case, they'll be able to track this individual's movement. If he was on foot, there's no place you can go in DC without being caught on CCTV. And so they'll track back the direction he was going. If he was on the train, on the metro, they can track back through the cameras. And if he was driving, we have license plate readers. So they'll be able to kind of get an idea of where he was coming. They're doing that right now. And then the motive, obviously, everyone wants to know about, and they'll probably come sooner than later.
We are back now with the coverage of the breaking news out of Washington, D.C. We want to show you this new video just coming into us here. So what you're looking at was captured moments after two National Guardsmen were shot in what is being called a targeted attack. So you see in this video here, you could see the very beginning, you can just make out above what is being blurred the movement of an officer appearing to render aid to someone there. There are guard members on the ground. That is a shattered bus stop that you see other officers standing around right there. Authorities say the two National Guard members who were shot are in critical condition. Again, this shooting just happening blocks from the White House this afternoon. I want to bring in CNN's senior White House correspondent, Kristen Holmes, who is monitoring these developments. She's traveling with the president, joining us from West Palm Beach, Florida. The president obviously following this very closely. What more are we hearing from the administration, Kristen?
Yeah, and there was actually a moment that we thought President Trump might speak to reporters. He had been at his golf club most of the day. We saw that he had posted this Truth Social, and in true Trump fashion, actually informed the public and the reporters covering this of some of the critical information that we didn't yet know, noting that, again, it was two National Guardsmen who had been critically injured, and also saying that the suspect had been critically injured as well, and promising retribution against the suspect. One of the things we are now hearing from the administration is this is a full administration response. You heard Kash Patel there, the director of the FBI. There are multiple federal agencies working on this, all of them invested in this, and they are watching closely to see what happens. There are still a lot of unanswered questions, and one of those questions that the White House has really been focusing and trying to get to the bottom of is what was the motive here. Now, in terms of President Trump's next steps, we have now heard from the Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, who says that President Trump has ordered 500 more troops to come to the ground in Washington, D.C., saying that this will ensure that they keep the city beautiful and safe. And I had spoken to a number of sources that work for D.C. government, who work for D.C. law enforcement, who noted that they thought this could be the next step here, that President Trump would ramp up the presence of the National Guard in Washington, D.C. And of course, I know I heard you speaking with John Miller earlier. I know this is something that we've been following carefully, and Brian Todd has talked to a number of these National Guardsmen. He's observed that these deployment of National Guard in Washington, D.C. has become in some ways a political flashpoint. So right now, there are a lot of eyes on the situation, and particularly in the White House, they are talking about what the motive was and thinking about the location here. This happened in Washington, D.C., but just steps away from the White House. Was that part of this plan? Did that play into the motive? Was there a presidential component of any of this? And right now, all officials are telling us that the motive is still unclear. Obviously, we've heard from sources that say that this looks as though these two National Guardsmen were targeted, but anything beyond that, they are still trying to get answers on when it comes to this horrific tragedy. So beyond the ordering of 500 more troops into Washington, D.C., there hasn't been an action taken by the White House. And we know we're not going to see President Trump again tonight. They called what they call a travel photo lid, which means the president's not going to be making any more public appearances. But of course, that doesn't mean he's not going to be posting on Truth Social. So we're keeping an eye on that, as he has in many of these tragic situations become almost one of the informers, passing on information as he gets it from these various briefings. And he's getting a lot of them right now.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, Kristen, appreciate it. We'll continue to check in with you, of course. Also with us, CNN senior law enforcement analyst Andrew McCabe. So when we look at all of this, based on what we do know in this moment, the fact that this was a targeted shooting and in an area that is just blocked from the White House by a metro station, this is an area that is full of law enforcement where there would be a number of National Guard troops. It's not clear while it was targeted. It's not, there's targeting and then there's very specific targeting, and there are still a lot of questions. What are your main questions based on the little bit of new information that we got out of that press conference?
Yeah, so Erica, we're getting like bits and pieces of what might lead to motive, but the big question hanging over this is exactly why this person chose to target those military members. Was that a target of opportunity? Was he looking for a chance to strike out at some sort of politically significant target, and the National Guardsmen happened to present what he considered to be the best opportunity, or was it specifically a statement or an act of violence against the presence of National Guard in D.C., which, as you know, has been controversial and has provoked all sorts of reactions from many people, the residents of D.C., things like that. So that's really what we need to get to the bottom of. I heard John Miller gave us in his update in the last block that they struggled, at least initially, and maybe still to this point, they were struggling to identify the shooter. That's the key moment when we'll be able to do some investigative work that could actually shed light on this person's motive. Because once you have them identified, you can go through the process of identifying their vehicle, their home, their maybe phone numbers, their email,
social media
addresses, social media addresses. So it kind of opens the door into analyzing things like the most important things are writings, what this person has said in any of those venues. But even more important than that at this point is associations. Who is in contact with this person? Is it possible that this person represents one of several people who harbor these same thoughts, these same plans? That's what's in the mind of counterterrorism investigators right now. Is this a lone gunman, or is this one person who's part of a group or a movement? And that'll really define for investigators the scope of this crisis, as it were.
I mean, as you lay out, it is so important to have the identity of this suspect, right? If that suspect is not cooperating, if we don't know the identity, how does law enforcement go about figuring that out? Can they take, this is part of my ignorance on this, but can they take fingerprints without permission if the suspect doesn't want to allow them to do that? Is it taking a picture and uploading it to a database to see if there can be some facial image mapping?
Short answer, Erica, is all that, right?
Yeah.
You can certainly use photographs to try to identify folks off of like biometric data sets. That's like the vanguard of how this is done to unknowns. We saw this used a lot in the Capitol insurrection cases. People were the video capture of people inside the Capitol was used through kind of internet-based resources and analytical tools that can tie you to other photographs that are out there in the social media sphere or what have you. But fingerprints are also an option. We have portable fingerprint machines. Used to be called quick capture. It's probably called something else now. Where you can take fingerprints from someone who is lying in a hospital bed or is otherwise detained, and run those prints against known identified prints in law enforcement data sets. Now, if this person has never been arrested before, never been officially fingerprinted, that check could come up negative, which would then lead you back to other means. Another thing you could do is they'll certainly use video capture around this incident to see if they can place him in a vehicle. If he parked a car and walked up to this place where the attack occurred, you would then have theoretically a vehicle that might be registered to him or registered to someone else who knows him, someone who loaned him a car. So there are many ways to get to that identification. Hopefully they can do it as quick as possible.
Yeah, and it gets quicker all the time, thankfully, as well. Andrew McCabe, appreciate it as always. We have a live look for you here. Investigators in Washington, D.C. on the scene of this afternoon's shooting that left 2 members of the National Guard in critical condition. Police say the suspect, who is also wounded and is in custody, appeared to intentionally target the Guard members. Sources say the motive for the shooting, though, is still not clear. Joining me this hour, Republican Congressman Don Bacon from Nebraska. He is an Air Force veteran and also serves on the House Armed Services Committee. Congressman, we appreciate you joining us tonight. This is obviously horrific on any day. Of course, the eve of Thanksgiving does add an extra bit of gravity, in fact, in many ways. Just what is your reaction at this hour to what we know and to what happened?
Well, all America is saddened to see that these 2 guardsmen were senselessly murdered. So our sympathy to their families and their coworkers that they served with and their friends. It's a heartbreaking day for family and friends and their fellow guardsmen. And I appreciate they were serving their country and doing what their country asked. We admire them, but our hearts go out to the families.
Yeah, and they are at this hour in critical condition, and we are hoping for another update, obviously, as soon as we can get one. We heard from officials earlier, including D.C. Mayor Muriel Bowser, who said that this was a targeted attack. What is your message, if any, to the other troops currently in Washington, D.C. right now?
No, we should always be on guard. I live about 4 blocks from the Capitol when I'm there. I always have my head on a swivel. When I walk down the Eastern Market, I'm always alert. We have to be alert, but we know that this is very random, very rare, but it happens. So we got to be alert. And unfortunately, in this political environment we're in, where everybody's escalating and angry at each other, the fringes get antagonized. They get, they don't. I mean, you and I, when we heard this stuff on TV, we could sift through it, but there's a few people in our society on the left and the right that get so antagonized that they take violent action. And so I think it's very incumbent upon all of us, Democrats and Republicans, in the news, that we treat each other decently. We can disagree without being, over the top, angry, and throwing gas. What I think is a fire right now in our society, and this hyperpartisanship that we have.
That is certainly an important message. I do want to reiterate, too, that while we are told this was a targeted attack, we do not know the motive. So it is important to remember in this moment, but certainly, and we don't know that there was anything behind it that was political, but to say that the political rhetoric in this country is high at this moment is an understatement. You are absolutely correct in that. Having served for a number of years, I'm curious, what are the resources as we see these troops, right, who have been, in some ways, to your point, in a difficult situation since they were initially deployed? And of course, we had just last week this ruling from a judge that actually found the deployment was likely illegal, although we know that was paused for 3 weeks. But the fact that these, we know from the state of West Virginia, I was just speaking with the Attorney General, the 160 members of the West Virginia National Guard, he said all volunteered to be there in this moment to continue to carry out that mission. This must be difficult for them to process. What are the resources that are available to National Guard troops, to those who are serving, when they see what is happening to their fellow guardsmen?
I served in the active duty, but I think in these situations, the Guard also has a lot of the same resources. There are, whether it's chaplains, a lot of different resources there to help folks with this. But I would like to point out something that you raised. I mean, I deployed 4 times in the Middle East, and I knew 5 people killed in Iraq and 1 in Afghanistan. It's a shame that we had 2 soldiers shot at me, and we don't know their status right now, like you say, but the fact that this happened in our own country is wrong. It's tragic. I just want to point that out. I appreciate that these two, but also all of the West Virginia Guardsmen, they're volunteers. And even if some folks disagree with the deployment of the Guard in our cities or Washington, D.C. in particular, it's not the Guard's fault. It's not these soldiers' fault. Well, let's have these debates in Congress. Let's have these debates in the courts, and let's follow the dictates of the courts. But it's surely not the fault of these Guardsmen and women who just want to serve their country.
Yeah. Secretary Higgs has said a short time ago that the president wants an additional 500 National Guard troops in Washington, D.C. Do you believe that that would help the situation?
I think it's a temporary solution, but it's not the long-term solution. The long-term solution is you have to have district attorneys, prosecutors, and judges that are willing to keep violent people behind bars. And you got to have enough prison space to put them. And let me give you a stat. I heard this from the chief of police of Washington, D.C. He said about a year ago that the average murderer had conducted 11 violent crimes before they did that murder, and they were arrested for them and then released back into the streets. And we just saw that murder in Chicago, where this person, I think, had 17 arrests.
They spread it back into the building. This is not something is considered in the building fire code, very similar to the Grenfell Tower fire in London.
Shidian Huang, thanks so much for joining. We'll continue to monitor developments there. Well, now to Washington, D.C., where officials say the two National Guardsmen are in critical condition after they were shot hours ago, not far from the White House. The assistant police chief explained the details of what happened.
At approximately 2:15 this afternoon, members of the D.C. National Guard were on high visibility patrols in the area of 17th and I Street Northwest when a suspect came around the corner, raised his arm with a firearm, and discharged it at the National Guard members. The National Guard members, there were other members that were in the area. They were able to, after some back and forth, able to subdue the individual and bring them into custody.
We do now have video taken just moments after the attack. It shows the police responding. I just want to warn you, some viewers may find it disturbing. As you watch this video, you can see the police in the background, though the victim is blurred, administering first aid to one of the downed guardsmen. Officials say they will treat this shooting as an assault on a federal law enforcement officer. Have a listen to the mayor of D.C., Muriel Bowser.
This is a targeted shooting. One individual who appeared to target these guardsmen.
Joining us now from the scene is Brian Todd. Brian, obviously a shocking event, downtown D.C., before a holiday, quite close to the White House. What are police telling you there now?
Well, Jim, they're still trying to ascertain a motive for this shooting. They were not able to answer that question when they spoke to reporters a short time ago. Let me set the scene for you a little bit here. We're at 17th and K Streets Northwest. The shooting basically occurred right over there. We have a very good vantage point at this point. These are two uniformed Secret Service officers in the foreground, a lot of police vehicles here. Now, right behind them, that's the corner of 17th and I Streets. That's where Jeff Carroll, the Executive Assistant Chief of the D.C. Metropolitan Police, you just ran a clip of him. He said that the shooting occurred basically right there at that corner. And I can tell you also, Jim, that just a short time ago, you see that tow truck there. That tow truck arrived a short time ago. Now, whether it's here to maybe block the roads or possibly tow away a vehicle associated with this crime is unclear. We're asking around about that, about whether the suspect may have a vehicle that is related to this shooting. A couple of other details we can tell you that according to FBI Director Kash Patel, the two National Guardsmen who were shot are now in critical condition. That's a key piece of information because earlier today, West Virginia Governor Patrick Morrisey had posted a message saying that the two National Guardsmen who are from the West Virginia National Guard had died as a result of the shooting. Then he went back on that and said that their conditions were unknown. And just a short time ago, we got the update from Kash Patel that the two guardsmen are in critical condition. They are treating this as an assault on a federal officer, according to Kash Patel. And according to the D.C. Assistant Police Chief Jeff Carroll, this occurred at about 2:15 p.m. Eastern Time when, again, over my right shoulder, he says the gunman came around a corner, raised A firearm, discharged the weapon at the National Guardsman. After some, quote, back and forth, he said, that suspect was pinned to the ground. He was taken into custody. At least one law enforcement source has told us that the suspect was taken away on a stretcher, so the suspect could have sustained some injuries there. Law enforcement source also telling CNN that the suspect is not cooperating with law enforcement at this time. We also spoke to two eyewitnesses, Jim, who said that they heard the gunshots and then turned and faced this area behind me and saw, one of them said he saw a man on the ground on his stomach with his hands behind his back. He assumed that was the shooter, and he was being held down by at least one person. And one lady said that she turned and saw, quote, a bunch of people administering CPR to someone who was on the ground. Neither of the witnesses could make out who the victims were who were being tended to. We assume, of course, those were the guardsmen who were hit. Jim?
Brian Todd, thanks so much. Well, joining me now, Kristen Holmes, traveling with the president to Florida. And Kristen, this is, we've heard several reactions from the president, of course, sadness for the condition of the soldiers, but also we're hearing from the administration that now they plan to send more guardsmen to D.C.?
Yeah, that's right. So we actually heard from the Secretary of Defense today, Pete Hegseth, who said that President Trump has now ordered, in light of this shooting, 500 additional troops to be on the ground in Washington, D.C. And according to Hegseth, this is to ensure that the city stays both beautiful and safe. I had spoken to a number of people who work within the D.C. government, as well as first responders who work for the D.C. government, not federal, who said that they thought earlier this was likely going to be the case. They saw that this was where this was going next in terms of President Trump's actions. We've heard President Trump now a number of times, as you noted, commenting on this, really providing information almost as though he is briefing directly the public from information he's getting. He was the first one who told us the public that 2 National Guardsmen had been hurt and were in critical condition, and that the suspect was also in critical condition. And as that happened, he also vowed retribution when it came to making sure that that suspect was punished. We won't see the president again tonight. They've issued a travel photo lid. That's essentially what they do when there's no more public appearances by the president. But it is still possible that we'll see another post on Truth Social. What we've come to kind of expect from President Trump is in these big, tragic situations, he ends up kind of being the communicator in addition to law enforcement, giving out information as he gets briefed. So we will, of course, wait and see if we hear from him again tonight. But I know the White House is following this very closely. A lot of questions right now within the White House, but also the administration as a whole, as to what the motive is. And it doesn't seem clear at this point. I've talked to a number of sources who say they're still trying to work through that. They're still looking for the answers as to how exactly this unfolded. Obviously, we have our source accounts. We have information from sources saying that this might have been targeted, and certainly seemed that way given what happened with this suspect just approaching these 2 guards and shooting them. But that doesn't really answer the question of motive, of why he did this. And this idea of these National Guard troops on the ground in Washington has become a political flashpoint for so many. I know, you've talked to Brian Todd. He has spent a lot of time covering this. He's talked to these National Guard members who have been spat at, who have been told to leave and called names. That's not everybody. It's not that everybody feels that way, but it has turned into kind of a political symbol that when President Trump brought them in to kind of fight his crime agenda in Washington, D.C. So that's, of course, on everyone's mind. Is there a political agenda to this? And just the proximity of where this happened, so close to the White House. Did that play into why this person chose these 2 guardsmen, for example? So there's still a lot of unanswered questions. But again, the White House is following this really closely. And as you've noted and as you've seen, the administration as a whole, this is an all hands on deck situation. It's not, just FBI. It's not just DHS. You are seeing members of every law enforcement agency on the ground in Washington, D.C., briefing the press, but also working this case. So they're taking this very seriously, and it just goes to show you, again, how closely they're following this.
Let me ask you this, though, Kristen, because a federal judge recently ruled that the prior deployment of National Guard troops to D.C. was illegal. Trump is ordering more to come to the city. Is this a fight with the courts that the president and the administration wants?
Yes.
My great fellow Americans, Earlier today, on the eve of the Thanksgiving holiday, 2 members of the National Guard serving in Washington, D.C., were shot at point-blank range in a monstrous ambush-style attack just steps away from the White House. They had been deputized as part of the most successful public safety and national security mission in the history of our nation's capital, the D.C. Safe and Beautiful Task Force, which has achieved an unprecedented reduction in violent crime and crimes of all type. This heinous assault was an act of evil, an act of hatred, and an act of terror. It was a crime against our entire nation. It was a crime against humanity. The hearts of all Americans tonight are with those 2 members of the West Virginia National Guard and their families. The love of our entire country is pouring out for them, and we are lifting them up in our prayers. As we are filled with anguish and grief for those who were shot, we're also filled with righteous anger and ferocious resolve. As President of the United States, I am determined to ensure that the animal who perpetrated this atrocity pays the steepest possible price. I can report tonight that based on the best available information, the Department of Homeland Security is confident that the suspect in custody is a foreigner who entered our country from Afghanistan, a hellhole on earth. He was flown in by the Biden administration in September 2021 on those infamous flights that everybody was talking about. Nobody knew who was coming in. Nobody knew anything about it. His status was extended under legislation signed by President Biden, a disastrous president, the worst in the history of our country. This attack underscores the single greatest national security threat facing our nation. The last administration let in 20 million unknown and unvetted foreigners from all over the world, from places that you don't want to even know about. No country can tolerate such a risk to our very survival. An example is Minnesota, where hundreds of thousands of Somalians are ripping off our country and ripping apart that once great state. Billions of dollars are lost, and gangs of Somalians come from a country that doesn't even have a government, no laws, no water, no military, no nothing. As their representatives in our country preach to us about our Constitution and how our country is no good. We're not going to put up with these kind of assaults on law and order by people who shouldn't even be in our country. We must now re-examine every single alien who has entered our country from Afghanistan under Biden, and we must take all necessary measures to ensure the removal of any alien from any country who does not belong here or add benefit to our country. If they can't love our country, we don't want them. America will never bend and never yield in the face of terror. And at the same time, we will not be deterred from the mission these service members were so nobly fulfilling. That is why tonight I can announce that I have directed the Department of War to mobilize an additional 500 troops to help protect our capital city. We will make America totally safe again, and we will bring the perpetrator of this barbaric attack to swift and certain justice if the bullets going in the opposite direction haven't already done that. During this time of the year, when we gather at home with loved ones, these 2 patriots were wearing the uniform of our country, patrolling the streets of our capital. They had taken a selfless oath to defend our nation against all enemies, foreign and domestic, and that is exactly what they were doing when they were gunned down in a savage attack. I want to express my extraordinary gratitude to every member of the United States military who is deployed tonight, at home and abroad. I also want to thank the Secret Service and the D.C. Metropolitan Police Department for their work today. This Thanksgiving, I ask every family to say a prayer for the 2 great heroes who were so horribly shot, and for their loved ones. Please say a prayer. May God bless them and comfort them, and may God bless and protect the United States.
I want to go to that breaking news out of D.C. Several people shot near the White House, including 2 members of the U.S. National Guard. The shooting happened in downtown Washington, D.C., close to the White House. The D.C. Police Department says one suspect in custody. The scene has been secured as well. According to them, CNN has reached out to the National Guard for comment. They're obviously responding to the situation right now. Law enforcement analyst Steve Moore joins me on the phone. And it's early days, Steve, but what have you heard?
Just not much more than you have. Anytime you have a shooting near the White House, obviously it's a point of concern. And then when you're discussing National Guardsmen, it could indicate that there's a possible political motive to it because of the recent moves by the administration to put military in Washington.
Just talk us through this area. We understand that parts of the areas outside the White House have been cleared. That doesn't suggest anything to you, does it, in relation to the White House? It could just be an area near the White House.
Yes, I mean, as you know, there's lots of parks right around the White House, the Treasury building, all the executive office building, all that entire area. And the fact that they're clearing this, to me, would mean that they expect that this may be something a lot more than just a crime gone bad or something like this. They're handling it as if they are assuming it's an intentional targeted shooting. However, that doesn't mean that's what it is, but you have to handle that. You can't go back and reinvestigate. So you have to start with a potential possible motive for this first.
Yeah, we seem to have multiple agencies involved, a huge presence already on the ground. I guess that's normal, isn't it? It's quite layered in Washington anyway.
Yeah, and part of that is because because it's a federal enclave, just about every federal agency has jurisdiction over it. The FBI has federal jurisdiction over the entire city. I mean, they could technically, though they never would, but they could technically stop people for drunk driving and stuff like that. They have normal police powers in Washington, D.C., as do almost all other federal agencies. So you're going to get everybody. I would assume parks, National Park Police are going to be there and having a major thing to do with it, because most of the land around there is set aside for monuments, parks, things like that. So they'll be involved. FBI will be involved. And of course, Metro Police will be involved.
The White House saying President Trump has been briefed. As I understand it, I think he's in Florida, isn't he, at the moment? So not an immediate concern for his safety right now, but he has been briefed. That shows how significant the White House thinks it is.
Yeah, I think right now, again, in the absence of more information, the thing that indicates to me most that this could be something other than a crime that went bad or an attempted arrest that went bad is the response by the federal agencies. This is not something where somebody got shot and you had the national, and I hate to sound so blasé about that, but where somebody got shot and you have the normal police presence and they put up crime tape and they investigate it and go. This appears to be at least being handled as though it's an intentional, potentially an intentional crime, and if that, it would be a potential terrorism case. So, and again, I'm not saying that's what's going on, but when you get to a situation like this or a scene like this, the first thing you have to do is determine the parameters of what you're looking at. If it's very obviously a gang-related shooting or something, you don't have to start working terrorism protocols. But if you arrive there and you have soldiers who've been shot, and it's right near the White House, you cannot ignore the fact that potential for political violence, for this to be a political violence situation.
Yeah, just flesh that out, because what you're saying, if I'm reading it properly, is it's not a couple of police officers who were shot here, which may have suggested, as you say, an arrest or some sort of scuffle or something like that. You've got National Guard members who were shot who wouldn't normally be involved, would they, with arresting people, for example?
No, not necessarily. You know, you have some National Guard units that are military police units who are very well schooled in law enforcement. In fact, many of them, when they're not at the Guard, are actual policemen in blue uniforms, not green. So they tend to be very sophisticated if it's a military police unit. But you'd have to find out whether there was a federal arrest taking place nearby, and possibly you had guardsmen providing security for the area. There's just so many things right now that are in the air, and we just don't have the answers to. But law enforcement seems to know a little bit more about it than we do.
Several people have been shot, including 2 members of the U.S. National Guard. The shooting happened in downtown Washington, close to the White House, where we find Brian Todd. Brian.
Right, Max. Let me set the scene for you. We're about a block and a half away from the White House on 18th Street Northwest. These are Secret Service police officers here trying to get as much traffic out of the way as possible, trying to clear the street as much as possible, also directing some pedestrians on foot to try to avoid this immediate area. You can see over here beyond me, this is looking east, kind of toward the White House. Just for perspective, I can tell you that the White House is this way, and then to the right about a block, and that is the area where the shooting occurred. Here's what we know now. According to Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem, 2 National Guardsmen were shot. According to 2 law enforcement sources who spoke to CNN, the 2 guardsmen engaged in gunfire with the suspected shooter prior to being shot. The sources say the suspect was detained and transported away on a stretcher. President Donald Trump has just posted on Truth Social that the 2 guardsmen are, quote, critically wounded. We are told by D.C. police that 1 suspect is in custody. They say the scene is secure. Again, to repeat what we're hearing from sources now, 2 law enforcement sources telling CNN that the 2 National Guardsmen engaged in gunfire with the suspected shooter just prior to being shot. The sources say that the shooter was detained and then transported away on a stretcher. President Trump has just posted on Truth Social that the 2 guardsmen were critically wounded. We do not have an update on the condition of the suspected shooter, but we are told that the shooter is in custody now. Again, I'll step away from the camera as our photojournalist Joe Merkel will show you the scene here as they try to secure this area near the White House. The shooting occurred this afternoon. And what one witness told our photojournalist Joe Merkel was that she heard gunshots and then she turned around and saw 2 National Guardsmen getting CPR. That is according to one witness who spoke to a member of our team here not far from the scene. Now, for some added perspective, the presence of the National Guard here in Washington has been somewhat controversial ever since President Trump ordered his law enforcement surge here in early August. About mid-August, the Guardsmen started to deploy in this city. They come from states like West Virginia, South Carolina, Mississippi, Louisiana. A lot of them are very young people. I can tell you that I've interacted with many of them since President Trump's law enforcement surge began here in August. And we have also witnessed kind of some of the controversy surrounding them. On occasion, when I've been out here covering the law enforcement surge, you do see on occasion some people coming up to law enforcement, to National Guardsmen, and jeering them or yelling at them. Now, most people who come up to them are friendly and want to take pictures with them, but we have seen on occasion people kind of giving them a little bit of trouble. So that kind of sets the more broad perspective and the controversial nature of the National Guard deployment here in Washington, Max. Again, I'll just step away. Well, there's a bus behind me, so you're not going to see very much. To recap what we know now, according to 2 law enforcement sources, the 2 National Guardsmen engaged in gunfire with the suspected shooter just prior to being shot. That the sources say that the suspect was detained and then taken away on a stretcher. Max?
Okay, Brian, appreciate it. Let you get back to your reporting there. I wanted to read that Truth Social post from Donald Trump that Brian was referring to a few moments ago. The animal that shot the 2 National Guardsmen, with both being critically wounded and now in 2 separate hospitals, is also severely wounded, but regardless will pay a very steep price. God bless our great National Guard and all of our military and law enforcement. Kristen Holmes joins us from West Palm Beach, Florida, where the president has been briefed on this shooting. At least he's out of the city, right? But, they're going to want to know what the motive was here, because that's going to define the response.
Yeah, and it is particularly for the White House because, as Brian said, there has been an ongoing controversy, and this idea of having National Guard in cities to prevent crime has actually become somewhat political. So that's part of the reason the White House is watching this so closely to see what the motive might have been. Now, I will note that it is quite extraordinary that what you're seeing here is President Trump essentially inserting himself into the investigation. As we knew, he was being briefed. He's been on the phone with these law enforcement sources, but he is giving the public more information that we were even hearing from law enforcement on the ground, especially saying that these two men, National Guardsmen, were critically wounded, that they were at two separate hospitals, also noting for the first time that the shooter had been severely injured as well. So he is really providing this update for the world as he gets briefed on what exactly happened in Washington, D.C. And of course, there's going to be questions with the proximity to the White House. The person who perpetrated this, were they trying to get closer to the White House at this time? Obviously, that would be a security threat. We do know originally that it was the Secret Service who was on the scene, as well as Park Police, meaning that this person was close enough, or the shooting was close enough to the White House to warrant a Secret Service response, as well as Park Police. The area around the White House is maintained by those two entities. So we are tracking this very closely, and in West Palm Beach, in Palm Beach, it is no different. President Trump did spend the day on the golf course. We saw him just now arriving back to his Mar-a-Lago home. That's where we saw this Truth Social post. And I would venture to guess that we're likely to hear from Vice President J.D. Vance any moment now as well. He was already scheduled to give remarks. He is doing a Thanksgiving trip, meeting with troops in Kentucky, and he was going to take the stage. So we'll be listening closely for that to see if Vance makes comments on this, particularly given now that the president himself has weighed in. It seems more likely that Vance is going to weigh in as well.
Yeah, as you say, the sensitivity here, National Guard speaks to so much of the politics right now. I mean, we were speaking to someone earlier suggesting that this could have been an arrest that went wrong, but it's less likely to involve the National Guard, isn't it? Even though they've been trained in some law enforcement, that would more likely involve a police officer, for example. So lots of people are speculating about, you know, why the National Guard were involved and whether they might have been targeted. So this is what we need to be really careful about, right, until we get the information.
Yeah, and look, we don't know. Even just letting you know from talking to sources all over Washington, I'm talking about White House, law enforcement, various law enforcement agencies, both local and federal, this is still very rapidly evolving. It was not made clear how many National Guardsmen were shot originally. I was talking to one law enforcement agent who was on the scene saying that they were still trying to sort out who had been shot, who was a National Guardsman, if the third person was a shooter that had been injured. And so there are still a lot of questions around this, even from the people that are on the ground, and that takes out the motive as well, which is a whole separate issue. So there's just the logistics around how this happened, why this happened, what exactly happened, and then going to the more why, what was the motive here, was this political? And that is also what the White House is tracking very closely to see. Again, as Brian said, you know, this has become kind of a flashpoint, not just here in Washington, well, there in Washington. I'm usually in Washington. I'm in Florida right now, but not just there in Washington, but around the country in these various cities where President Trump has deployed the National Guard. It has become an environment in which, sure, you do see people complimenting them, saying thank you for your service, but you also see people jeering at them and insulting them, saying they don't need to be there. And I can say that firsthand from seeing that in Washington, D.C. And a reminder that these men and women who serve in Washington, D.C., who were brought here as part of this crime crackdown, it's not as though, you know, they're just randomly doing this out of the goodness of their own heart. They're members of the National Guard, and the way that works is like any military structure, they follow orders. They were ordered to go to Washington, D.C., and they have been there for several months as part of a crime crackdown. So this idea of it being political, really in the larger scheme of things, seems wild. Because again, these are part of the military. They were ordered to do this, and now they're doing it. But so much of what we've seen in the United States in the last couple of years has been politicized, as is the National Guard has somehow become more of a political symbol than a military one. And so again, a lot of questions, as you noted, Were they targets? Was this some kind of incident that went wrong? How did this unfold? And was there a political aspect of this? Was there a presidential White House aspect of this? All of that we still don't know, as these details are trickling in very slowly. But I can tell you this, every federal agency is all over this. Every local agency is all over this. They want to get to the bottom of this, and there's going to be an enormous amount of pressure from President Trump and the White House to get answers on this.
Kristen, thank you so much for that. Back with you when you get some more. And to speak what she was saying there, even Reagan Airport had to cancel all incoming flights briefly to allow air ambulances to move in and out, and that was in relation to this operation. So the scale of the response here has been enormous, which does suggest a level of investigation.
He says these brave West Virginians lost their lives in service of their country. We're in ongoing contact with federal officials as the investigation continues, going on to say that the entire state grieves with their families, their loved ones, and the Guard community. We should note that the scene, according to officials, has been secured, and a suspect is also in custody, which, as of a few moments ago, President Trump confirmed was severely, critically wounded as a result of this shooting. We have our panel back with us, and I want to go to CNN Chief Law Enforcement Analyst John Miller to get your reaction, John, now that we've learned that these two guardsmen have passed away as a result of what happened today.
A picture that is increasingly looking like something happened very suddenly, very quickly, and that it is beginning to appear, based on the facts that come together, there's a strong likelihood that these two National Guardsmen were the target, as opposed to they encountered something else going on the street and intervened. And I say that because I am told by sources that at least one of them suffered from a gunshot wound to the head, and that this may have been something where they were targeted by the shooter before anything else happened, and by surprise. The shooter, of course, also wounded. Now, the rules of engagement for National Guardsmen in the street can vary from place to place about whether they are carrying their long rifles or just sidearms, or whether they're loaded and ready to go, or whether the ammunition is carried separate. In the case of Washington, D.C., the rules of engagement have been, if you are part of President Trump's D.C. Safe, Beautiful Task Force, as he named it, then everybody, the agents from law enforcement agencies, but also the National Guard members, are deputized as special deputy U.S. Marshals, which allows them to be federal law enforcement agents while they're on duty and armed with loaded weapons. In this case, we believe that those two members were part of that task force and did have loaded weapons and were able to return fire, because we also know the suspect was seriously wounded and taken to a trauma center. So we're not completely in focus here, but the picture is emerging as one that looks like they may have been the only targets of this shooting.
And to that point, John, at this point, we do not know of any other victims from this shooting. There are no other victims of this shooting at this point, as you mentioned, that picture becoming a little bit more clear. But obviously, the tragic update that we got in just the last few minutes is these two National Guardsmen that were shot have died after this shooting, as was put out by the governor of West Virginia, where these National Guardsmen had deployed from. While we've been speaking, the Vice President of the United States has been making comments about this, saying this just moments ago. Let's listen in.
It is great to be here in beautiful Fort Campbell, Kentucky, and let me just say, I want to say first, before we get started, on a somber note, we had, and some of you may have seen this on your phones or on social media, but apparently there was a shooting outside the White House just a couple of hours ago. And we're still learning everything. We still don't know the motive. There's a lot that we haven't yet figured out. But what we do know is that a couple of National Guardsmen were injured in the line of duty. And first of all, I want everybody who's a person of faith to say a prayer for those two National Guardsmen, that they're able to spend Thanksgiving with their families instead of losing their lives, because I understand they're still in pretty tough condition. But I think it's a somber reminder that soldiers, whether they're active duty, reserve, or National Guard, our soldiers are the sword and the shield of the United States of America. And as a person who goes into work every single day in that building and knows that there are a lot of people who wear the uniform of the United States Army, let me just say very personally, thank them for what they're doing. We're grateful to them, and we're praying that they're going to be safe and they're going to spend Thanksgiving with their families. God bless them. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit.
Obviously, all of this happening just the day before Thanksgiving here.
Yeah, and sadly, it appears that the vice president wasn't aware of the news that we just got from West Virginia's governor that the 2 National Guardsmen have actually passed away. And as we monitor the situation, more details come into focus. As we just learned from John Miller, it appears that at least one of the guardsmen was shot in the head, and that changes potentially the nature of this investigation. So I do want to go back to Jonathan Wackrow, if he's still with us. Jonathan, I wonder quickly what you make of that detail and how that might shape what investigators are looking at here.
Yeah, well, it really takes a tragic turn. Right now, this is a homicide investigation. With those deaths confirmed, the case formally transitions into a homicide investigation. And when you look at the attack dynamics that John Miller had described, what investigators are going to do is they're going to work backwards now. They're going to start looking for additional pre-attack behavior by this suspect. And the way that they're going to do that is through this video capture that we've described earlier, the hundreds of video cameras that are around not only this area, but throughout the district at large. They're going to look back and they're going to trace back the movements of the suspect to identify, was this individual casing other locations to potentially launch an attack? Was there directed interest towards other members of the National Guard? They're going to look at all of that. Again, these attack dynamics, the fact that these individuals were targeted is a significant fact right now, and there'll be more to come as this investigation continues.
And critically here, as we've again learned in the past few minutes of the 2 National Guardsmen killed, there was this question of whether they were actually targeted. And at this point, no other victims of the shooting outside of these 2. And of course, as we understand, the gunman also, the suspect also in custody. We learned that from Metro Police as well.
It will be no doubt a thorough and extensive investigation as officials try to get down to the bottom of what happened here. It also portends questions for the future of this National Guard deployment in the nation's capital, whether the president sees this as a reason perhaps to expand it.
So let's get right to our team of reporters who are following this story. Brian Todd is near the scene in Washington. Kristen Holmes is traveling with the president in Florida. And also here, our chief law enforcement and intelligence analyst, John Miller. Brian, first to you. Tell us what you're seeing on the ground and what have you learned in the past hour?
Right, Manu. We are at 18th and 8th Streets Northwest, about a block and a half from the White House. I'll have our photojournalist Joe Merkel kind of train his camera past me and down 8th Street. 8th Street now closed off. You can see there's a huge swarm of police activity. We believe the shooting just occurred just down this block. According to the Joint Task Force, which oversees the National Guard, the shooting occurred near the Farragut West Metro Station, which is just down the block here. These are Secret Service police officers directing traffic, trying to get traffic clear from this area. I just heard this one officer tell people that unless you are parked down here or you're staying at one of the hotels down in that in this area of 8th Street, even foot traffic not allowed down on that street. The latest that we have been told by West Virginia Governor Patrick Morrisey is that the 2 National Guardsmen who were shot have died of their injuries. According to 2 law enforcement sources who spoke to CNN, the 2 guardsmen engaged in gunfire with the suspected shooter just before being shot, and the sources tell us that the suspect was detained and then transported away on a stretcher. In addition, according to the FAA, Reagan National Airport briefly halted flights to the airport as they had to deal with a medevac helicopter activity at the airport, activity that was, of course, related to the shooting, but we're told that normal operations have resumed. Manu, what we can also tell you is that we did speak to a witness. Our team spoke to a witness to the shooting. She actually heard the gunshots, didn't physically see them, but heard the gunshots, then turned around and said she saw, quote, a bunch of people administering CPR to people who were on the ground. So very disturbing and kind of a chaotic scene here, we're told, near the Farragut West Metro Station, which again is just down here. You're looking east on 8th Street, just down this way. Traffic shut off down here. You can see all the police activity down there. We're told the scene is secure. Suspect is in custody. Manu?
Brian, do we expect a news conference at all from the authorities?
We're trying to get word of that, Manu. We have not been told anything about that just yet. We're pursuing some information on that. We just don't know yet when they're going to brief us further on this incident, but we're after it.
Okay. All right. And we'll be with you back with you. And John Miller, what are you hearing from your sources about the nature of this shooting?
Well, they're still obviously piecing it together, but if you listen to what Brian Todd told us, the eyewitness hearing the shots and then seeing people immediately go into CPR, the fact that at least one of the two guardsmen sustained a shot to the head, the gunman who was on scene long enough to be taken into custody, apparently with a handgun, also taken to the hospital for injuries that we do not know the extent of. It is emerging as a possibility that the guardsman may have been the sole target of this shooting. What we have not heard from any of the witnesses or law enforcement authorities was that there was some other incident that they were intervening in. Of course, all of this is preliminary because there are still more questions than answers because of the speed with which this unfolded. Very quickly, because they patrol that area as part of their normal perimeter duties from the White House, the U.S. Secret Service Uniform Division was on the scene. I've reviewed some of the photographs where you can see Secret Service Uniform Division officers actually working on one of the guardsmen who is down on the sidewalk at that point, trying to apply immediate medical aid as they wait for the ambulance to arrive. What we are also told is that this incident, a couple of blocks from the White House and within that patrol zone, so far, and again, we're early in the investigation, hasn't revealed that there's any White House interest involved in the shooting. Right now, it is beginning to appear that the National Guardsman may have been the sole target of this shooting, but again, still a lot of investigative work to go.
And John, Trump says the suspect is in custody and is severely wounded. Does that tell you that there was that he was shot, that he or she, we don't know who the suspect is yet, but do we think this person might have been shot in retaliation for shooting these guardsmen?
So that is a possibility. I've seen also photographs of that suspect being put into the ambulance and the wound from the pictures isn't apparent as to what it is, but he was removed to the hospital from the scene, and we are aware of the president's statement of him being severely wounded. Now, those National Guardsmen, because, Mano, they are believed to be part of the D.C. Safe and Beautiful Task Force that was created on orders from the President of the United States, their rules of engagement are different from many of the National Guardsmen that have been deployed in other cities. They are deputized as Special Deputy U.S. Marshals. So they go from being National Guardsmen to actual law enforcement officers with those powers and authority in the streets of Washington, D.C., which is they can be armed with loaded weapons. They can use deadly force under the rules of engagement. So one of them or both of them may have had a chance to shoot back, but law enforcement was there very quickly and took the gunman into custody. So still a couple of blank spots in the chain of events there.
So Kristen Holmes, who's traveling with the president in Florida. Kristen, the president has been briefed. He's posted about this. He did mention that this suspect has been severely wounded. What has he been saying, and what are you hearing from the White House?
Well, what I'm hearing from the White House is that they're monitoring this very closely. We also just heard from Vice President J.D. Vance. He was at an event. He was previously scheduled to make remarks. It was a Thanksgiving event. He was talking to troops, and he did address this at the very top. Now, it did seem as though he wasn't given the breaking news that these National Guardsmen had died when he got up there. But one thing he said that was very interesting, and something I know the White House is watching closely, is that there was no known motive at this time. It goes to show you what they are focusing on. And they're still are a lot of details, as John said, as Brian said. I know they've been talking to a lot of these law enforcement officials, as have I, as to what exactly the larger picture is here. And that's what they're still trying to sort out. And I can tell you, just in the span of 5 minutes, I was talking to people on the ground who were telling me conflicting information as they were trying to figure out what exactly happened. How did this happen? Why were the shots fired? And eventually this will change into what was the motive here? Was there any kind of political motive? Was there any motive given that it was so close to the White House? Now, one of the things that President Trump did when he posted that the suspect was critically injured is he also essentially vowed retribution for the injuring. At that point, we had not confirmed that they had died of these National Guardsmen. So again, you're seeing in real time just how seriously the White House is taking this and just how closely they are watching this. President Trump really using his platform, as we've seen in a lot of these kind of emergency situations in which he is somewhat adjacent to, this shooting happening in D.C. with National Guardsmen who were ordered to be there as part of his crackdown on crime near the White House. Now, almost breaking news to the public about what exactly had happened. He was the one who said that the 2 National Guardsmen were in critical condition. He also said that the suspect had been in critical condition. So we can likely expect more updates from him as well as he is briefed. And one thing, Manu, just to kind of close the loop on this, it's not just that the White House is focused on this. We are seeing almost every federal agency, law enforcement agency on the ground working with the local police in Washington, D.C. to try and get a handle on what happened, which just goes to show you, this is a huge presence on the ground, just how seriously the administration as a whole is taking what happened today.
Yeah, and just to fill you in, if you're just tuning in to this breaking news that happened just a couple hours ago, shooting about northwest of the White House, very close to the White House. 2 National Guardsmen have been killed in the shooting. The suspect is injured and is in custody. The governor of West Virginia, Patrick Morrisey, posting on X, it is with great sorrow that we can confirm both members of the West Virginia National Guard were shot earlier today in Washington, D.C., have passed away from their injuries. He goes on to say these brave West Virginians lost their lives in the service of their country. I want to bring back Brian Todd, who is on the ground just near the scene there. And Brian, there's been a lot of discussion about Trump's deployment of the National Guard. There are about 2,000 National Guards troops that are in D.C. right now. A federal judge a few days ago, last week, had struck down, said that it was actually not legal to send these National Guards into the streets of D.C., but had given some time for the administration to appeal that ruling. So that's why we're still seeing these guardsmen in D.C. As you go around D.C., as you cover what's happening in the streets of the district, how widespread are these troops deployed? Where do you see them deployed, and how active are they in engaging in crime in the streets in D.C.?
Well, Manu, that's been a point of some controversy since the National Guardsmen were deployed here in August. They came from states like West Virginia. You heard the governor saying that the 2 members of the West Virginia National Guard were the 2 guardsmen who were killed today. They came from Mississippi. They came from Ohio, South Carolina, and other states as well. It has been controversial ever since they got here. Mostly they've been patrolling near the monuments. They've been patrolling near metro stations. As a matter of fact, the Joint Task Force said this shooting happened just outside the Farragut West Metro Station, which is just down this way. And during in my covering of the law enforcement surge in August and in September, my teams and I noticed that a lot of people would kind of crowd around the National Guardsmen. The vast majority of people were friendly. They wanted to take selfies with them. They wanted to take pictures of them and didn't bother them. But we did witness protests, several protests against the National Guard deployment. We did witness people who were coming up to them and jeering at them and yelling angrily at them to go back home. So their deployment here, of course, was not without some controversy. Another aspect of their deployment, I can tell you, was that in the initial days that they were here, they were not authorized to carry firearms, and then they were later allowed to carry firearms in some instances. But mostly they have been deployed in areas like, again, popular areas for nightclubs and restaurants. We've seen them in those areas. We've seen them down near this area near the White House, of course, and this is where this shooting took place. We've seen them near the monuments, and again, near metro stations. And most of the National Guardsmen are very young people. They come from all sorts of places in rural areas of Louisiana, West Virginia, areas like that. We've talked to them on occasion. And, you just get a sense that they were here to do a job. They wanted to do that job and then go home as soon as possible. But, again, it's been pretty much controversial since the moment they set foot in the city.
Brian, your team has been talking to people on the ground near the scene. What are you hearing from people as they're walking by, as they're reacting to this news, and from anyone who may have witnessed at least the response to this heinous act?
Well, we did talk to one witness, a lady who said that she heard the gunshots and then turned around and saw several people. The quote was a whole bunch of people administering CPR to someone who was on the ground. That's one witness account that we got. Other people who've been walking around this area have actually been asking us questions about what happened. There's a lot of confusion, as there always is in situations like this. And again, I'll just kind of take you past me here. As you can see, the law enforcement presence, they are directing traffic. They just told people over here who are trying to go down H Street, east on H Street here, that unless you're parked down here or staying in a hotel down here, they were not even allowing foot traffic down here. Now, they did just open this portion of H Street over here to my right, your left. You can see some buses and other vehicles going through. This was closed until a moment ago, and you see these are Secret Service police who are directing traffic. They're just trying to eliminate some of the snarl in this area that comes with so many streets being closed down. My team and I, again, had to park several blocks away and walk several blocks just to get to this location. A lot of streets in the downtown area in Washington, D.C. shut down as a result of this incident. They'll probably be shut down for hours to come.
John Miller, talk to me about how the investigation is expected to play out here, particularly with so many law enforcement agencies involved in this.
Well, you have the entire alphabet soup of the federal law enforcement community there because it's Washington, D.C., and this was an attack on 2 federal officers, not just members of the National Guard, but we believe that they would have been part of the deputized law enforcement group that's been deployed there, which means this is not just a D.C. homicide case, which, of course, is enormously important if 2 people are gunned down and killed, blocks from the White House and the nation's capital. But when those 2 people are there as government employees serving their country on their mission, and they are targeted, apparently, and a law enforcement source has just confirmed to me that based on what they know so far, it appears the gunman walked up and targeted the 2 Guard members outside of any other incident going on. So it is starting to emerge a picture of what could be an ambush because they were there in their National Guard uniforms. That makes it an assault on federal officers. So you'll have the D.C. homicide case running in parallel with an FBI investigation led by the Joint Terrorism Task Force because of where we are and who was targeted. And both of those are going to merge together.
And I just want to read a new statement we have gotten from the governor of West Virginia, Patrick Morrisey, who is saying this now. He said, "We are now receiving conflicting reports about the condition of our 2 Guard members and will provide additional updates once we receive more complete information. Our prayers are with these brave service members, their families, and the entire Guard community." And that was at 4:04 p.m. So just moments ago. Remember, that was just before he had just after he had posted that the 2 members were shot and they had died from their injuries. So John Miller, what's your? I mean, hopefully this is good news that these members are still alive and they're fighting for their life and can make it through these injuries and these gunshot wounds. What's your reaction to the governor now saying that they're conflicting reports about their condition, and they're going to wait to give additional updates until they get more complete information?
Well, it's one of the things that you see when you have politicians and elected officials who jump into these things and get into that news cycle. One of the things that you experience when you get used to showing up to these things as a commander, as an investigator, as I have many times, is that the first story is never right, and that the details don't come together all at once. It is a series of pixels that you have to develop and get a richer picture as you go. So I'm not surprised at the sudden reversal, but We can only pray that it's correct and that it stays correct, that one or more of them has survived. This is part of the fog of war, and it's why, even as I describe these things, as does Chuck Ramsey and Andy McCabe, we always start off with, this is preliminary, and it's still coming together. So that could be a glimmer of better news, but again, we're going to have to wait till we get the official word from medical people where they're being cared for, because they're the only ones who are going to really know.
Yeah, so just again, if you're just tuning in, the shooting near the White House a couple hours ago, 2 National Guardsmen shot. Initially, the governor of West Virginia said that they had died from the shooting that occurred, but now the governor is saying that there's conflicting information out there, and they'll provide additional updates once they receive more complete information. So we'll try to learn more about their condition, as the shooter is also in custody and also injured as well. And John, stay with us, because joining me now is former senior FBI official and active shooter expert Catherine Schweit, and former Washington, D.C. Police Chief Charles Ramsey. He's a CNN senior law enforcement analyst. And we're also joined by phone by Steve Moore. He's a CNN law enforcement contributor and a retired FBI agent. So Charles, first to you. This is the city which you, of course, ran this police department for some time. Walk us through what you expect is happening behind the scenes right now among law enforcement.
Well, behind the scenes, since this individual who committed the crime is in custody, they've no doubt already ID'd him. They're now taking steps to go through his social media footprint, probably executing search warrants at a residence, a vehicle, if he had a vehicle, in the area. They're trying to get as much information as possible to try to determine the motive. I mean, John is coming up with a lot of information from the scene right now, but there's also an awful lot of questions that are unanswered. He's absolutely right. There'd be a parallel investigation going on with DC homicide as well as the JTTF, because these individuals were guardsmen. Hopefully the second post that we got from the governor is good news, but it also points out a problem with social media and people wanting to be the first to get information out, and information that is not always accurate. And, these people have families and they watch television, and to think that your loved one has been murdered, and if it turns out not to be true, think about the trauma that causes. So you need to have facts. And John was also right when he said the first story is usually not right. The late John Timoney said that all the time, and he was absolutely right. Until you have some real investigation taking place and you start to find out the facts that, as you know them to be, based on some evidence or statements or whatever, that information will be made public at some point in time. But you always have people that want to jump the gun and want to put too much information out there, not really having access to all the information. I hope these individuals are still alive, fighting for their lives. I truly do hope that's the case. But right now, police are focused on the investigation. And trying to get to the bottom of the why this took place.
Yeah, and Catherine, this is one of your areas of expertise. So tell us what investigators are doing now with the suspect who is in custody.
I think the idea behind, this guy's in custody right now, is all what the chief just mentioned, the idea that despite the frustration and the anger that the whole rest of the team has in DC police and the rest of the National Guard, all the law enforcement, they have to do their jobs. So they have to dig in and collect the evidence they can and try to find out what do they know about this suspect, and try to be able to answer the questions that really the public wants answered more than anything else. The people who are the family members and the friends of the guardsmen. And it's kind of reminiscent of, we just passed the 21st anniversary of the loss of Martha Dixon Martinez, Michael Miller, as the chief knows, Hank Daly from MPD, as killed right in their office right here in downtown in the November 22nd, 21 years ago. And we just passed that anniversary and saw how it traumatized the city and law enforcement then, and they're going through that kind of trauma again, but they still have to do their jobs.
And we continue to follow the breaking news out of Washington, D.C. Law enforcement sources say 2 National Guardsmen who were shot near the White House were targeted. D.C. police say the suspect is now in custody. One source says the individual is not cooperating and did not have any identification on him. Kristen Holmes is in West Palm Beach, but we begin with John Miller, who is in Washington, D.C. I mean, John, what are your sources telling you? What we just learned there is incredibly tragic, because from what we understand of the events, these National Guardsmen were targeted.
And that is what it appears, based on law enforcement's earliest reviews of the video from security cameras. It appears that the suspect walks up to the guardsmen, who are in uniform, fairly quickly, pulls out a handgun and opens fire. And then in the next chaotic seconds, another guardsman appears on the video to take cover and possibly return fire. You see the glass of a bus shelter shatter. One of the guardsmen goes down on the ground. A number of law enforcement people who appear very quickly, and that area is heavily patrolled by the Secret Service's uniform division that patrols the perimeter of the White House, which is just 2 blocks over and 1 block down. So within 3 blocks of this scene, very quickly appear with additional guardsmen who were on separate posts around this Farragut train station where the incident occurred, and they are struggling on the ground to handcuff a suspect who, in this possible crossfire with other National Guardsmen, was wounded. And in the moments of chaos, you can see that this occurred very suddenly. So it is not an incident where something else was going on and the National Guard soldiers intervened in some other street crime in progress. It appears at this point that they were targeted deliberately by this individual who, at this time, is still unidentified.
And John, forgive me, you are clearly in New York and not in Washington, and I do want to lean into your deep experience in this city as being with the NYPD and really leading the terrorism outfit here. I mean, what are your impressions at this point, given the fact that these were National Guard that were supposed to be deployed to make the city safer, and now they themselves, it appears, have been targeted?
Well, the National Guard has become of late a little bit of a lightning rod because of how this administration has deployed them and what controversies they have found themselves in the middle of, whether it is the role that they have played in multiple cities in assisting groups like ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, and Border Patrol. They have become a bit of a lightning rod in the roundup and deportation efforts that are going on for people who are here illegally. But at the same time, just their presence in Washington makes them a potential target, because there they are in uniform. And I think it was on November 7th, we saw another call from ISIS, which is reemerging through its propaganda arms, to call on lone wolf attacks in both the United States and Europe, and to attack symbols of the government and law enforcement. So right now, we don't know what the motive was, and we probably won't know what the motive was or is in this case until they get that gunman identified and figure out what has he been doing, who has he been communicating with, did he leave a message behind or forward about the motive for this. Right now, that's a blank spot. They're going through the possibilities, but he, when he's identified, is going to be the key to those answers.
Kristen Holmes, to you now in Florida. You are traveling with the president. He is in Mar-a-Lago for Thanksgiving. He obviously has taken action here and has already made his thoughts pretty clear, given this absolutely chilling event. As I said, inside of 2 blocks from the White House.
Yeah, and they are monitoring this very closely. And I do want to note, I'm not sure if you announced this yet, but we have now heard from the Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, who says that President Trump has ordered 500 new troops to be sent to D.C. in the aftermath of this shooting for what he says is to keep the city beautiful and safe. I had actually spoken to a number of members of the D.C. government and D.C. responders who believe that this was likely to be where this story went, that President Trump was going to ramp up the presence in Washington, D.C. Now, we won't see President Trump again today. They call what they call a lid, which means the president won't be seen in public. He's not going to be making any remarks, but that doesn't mean that he's not going to be posting on Truth Social. And as we've already seen, he has been kind of breaking some of the news of what he is hearing to the public. In his Truth Social post, he was the one who noted for the first time that there were 2 guardsmen down who had been critically injured. That critically injured part was not something we had heard before. Obviously, as we've been reporting, there's some confusion as to what exactly happened with those 2 guardsmen. The West Virginia governor first saying that they had both died, then coming back and saying that he was getting conflicting reports. So we're still waiting on that part of this. Then President Trump essentially vowing retribution against the suspect, saying that he was severely injured. That's how the public learned about the suspect's well-being. And then noting that he was going to essentially, quote unquote, pay the price for what happened on the streets of D.C. earlier today. One of the things I am told the White House is watching incredibly closely is the motive, the why for all of this. And right now, they still seem to have no answers.
Out of Washington, D.C., 2 National Guardsmen were shot a short time ago near the White House. Law enforcement sources say the Guardsmen engaged in gunfire with a suspect before being shot. Police say the scene is now secure and a suspect is in custody. National Guard troops from multiple states have been in the U.S. Capitol as part of the president's crackdown on crime in that city. Daniel Brunner is a retired FBI special agent, and he joins us now. And I kind of want to get your opinion on this as we hear from the president that he's deploying 500 more troops to the city. In your estimation, is this a good idea at this hour?
Well, I think at this point, we're seeing that, National Guardsmen were deployed in downtown D.C., where not necessarily all of the crime is being seen. Anacostia, the outskirts, where there's more crime incidents. If you're going to deploy guardsmen, I think it would be there. But clearly, your guardsmen are standing out on post, standing at the street corner. That was, in my opinion, this was a targeted attack. Based on the witnesses reporting saying that all of a sudden they heard gunshots. There was no chaos, no struggling, and the fact that you've seen photos from on scene, whereas the glass was shattered at the bus stop. My opinion is, based on my instincts as an FBI agent for 20 years, this individual targeted, found these 2 guardsmen who were standing their post, and they just walked right up. This is a very difficult environment for them. They're not built for law enforcement. They are National Guardsmen. They're trained in combat, military operations. They're not trained in street crime, street incidents, and how to recognize a potential threat that's upcoming to them. So I feel that the president is putting them in a very difficult position, targeting them and making them somewhat of a scene of a target for an incident, much like what we see here today.
And this has been disputed in the courts as well. In fact, the very presence of National Guard is still at this moment before the courts. In terms of them becoming a political target, I mean, as you said, you as a former FBI agent, are you creating... in fact, let's pause to listen to the FBI Director, Kash Patel.
To include the Department of Homeland Security, Secret Service, ATF, DEA, and we're thankful for the mayor's assistance in this matter, the Metropolitan Police Department and their skills in investigating homicides and gun shootings in this city is exceptional. We will work together collaboratively because this is a matter of national security, because it's a matter of pride. President Trump has been informed. We've been in contact with the White House. We will shortchange the American public with no resources to make sure we find and safeguard our nation's capital right here in Washington, D.C., and bring anyone responsible for this heinous act of violence to justice. I would lastly like to add to the American public and the world, please send your prayers to those brave warriors who are in critical condition and their families. They are here serving our country. They are here protecting everyday Americans and citizens around the world in our nation's capital. They are the heroes of this day, and we must remember them on this day and every day, and their families and the sacrifice they have made. I will now turn it over to Chief Carroll of the Metropolitan Police Department. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jeff Carroll. I'm the Executive Assistant Chief here at the Metropolitan Police Department. At approximately 2:15 this afternoon, members of the D.C. National Guard were on high visibility patrols in the area of 17th and I Street Northwest when a suspect came around the corner, raised his arm with a firearm, and discharged it at the National Guard members. The National Guard members, there were other members that were in the area. They were able to, after some back and forth, able to subdue the individual and bring them into custody. Within moments, members of law enforcement in the area were also able to assist and bring that individual into the custody. At this time, as the director mentioned, the National Guard members are being treated